I'm happy to introduce Commissioner Silver, who Jerome and I, my colleague and I, met a few months ago. And we realized that the Commissioner is very invested in the playgrounds in the city and also seems to really like to hang out in the city. So we're curious to hear, after having already a fantastic career, was a former president of the American Planning Association, and yeah, a great man all in all. What do you like about hanging out in the city, Commissioner, and what can you tell us? So, your spot.
First of all, welcome to my neighborhood. This is where I hang out. I live 3 blocks from this location. So if some of you are not from Brooklyn, welcome to Brooklyn. Basically the coolest place on the face of the planet. You all know that, right? All right. But there's no question that where I like to hang out really is in public spaces. Now, I don't define it whether it's green or a hard surface, but to me, I see the public space, whether it's green or hard surface, as all one. And so there's no place in particular. I enjoy all the parks and public spaces, and actually every weekend, and what I do is on my own, I see a couple of staff in here, I go to parks and public spaces and just spend my time really observing people and seeing how they use public space, all generations, different cultures, different age groups, families, seniors, singles. To me, I can take a survey, but watching people interact with public space are places where I like to hang out. So I'm now going to shift gears. Is that okay for my presentation? And then I'll walk you through a journey. I know I have 20 minutes, and I'll stick to my schedule. And then I'll share with you the exciting things that are unfolding here in New York City in our public space. First, I just want to walk you through a little bit of history. I'd love to give context and really enjoy my conversation with David and Jerome. But I always like to explain to people, in terms of some of the public space in parks, it's not just parks. We have an immense amazing network which covers 14% of the city's footprint. And these are all the places where people can enjoy throughout the city, some for mental health, some for physical health, but really parks and public spaces are the living rooms of our cities. It's where people fall in love with spaces, but also fall in love with each other. And so we want to make sure we have those incredible spaces really throughout our city. But I want to give you a journey about the evolution of parks and public spaces. A lot of people don't know this. Back in the mid-19th century, it was the gardens. And that's where people went to enjoy the public spaces, mostly in Europe, where they were found. They were there for relaxation, where people can just go and enjoy. And that period basically ended somewhere in the mid-19th century, although you see many gardens in many of our parks throughout the world. And then, around the late part of the 19th century, 20th century, for the first time we had the emergence of this profession called landscape architecture, where the first time we now shaped and molded land where people won't just sit, but now there are meadows and gardens and forests and trees where people can now stroll through nature defined by architecture, where now people can enjoy space for the first time. And as you all know, this is Central Park, Bethesda Terrace. Many of our parks were shaped this way all over the country. Then we moved into what I call the recreational facility era, AKA Robert Moses, where for this point in time, we were urbanizing very rapidly, and during this period, recreation was poured into our parks. And some people think this is where we still are today. If you have a park, you pack park recreation in it, and it was important at the time. Hundreds of people used to drown in rivers in our city, but then we started providing recreational facilities so people had places to play, and here's High Bridge being constructed during that era. But things move on. Some people still think we're stuck in a recreational facilities era, but now we've moved to the post-industrial era. And at this period, people for the first time are now returning to cities. We had land where people never had access to. It was industrial land, land that was damaged and soiled, and now we're bringing it back to productive use. And that use primarily is for beautiful parks. This is Riverside South, formerly industrial. Here's another view of Riverside South. Now, when I observe people in parks, if a woman is that bold that she can dress that way, then you know the park is successful. Usually you look for the ratio of men to women. More women to men in a park is successful. The other thing women don't like in parks, men, keep your shirts on. Not popular in parks. And I wonder what that couple is doing right there. I didn't want to. But a willow tree offers a very good surrounding. And then the High Bridge, again, here's an industrial use that's providing incredible recreational and both mental health and enjoyment for the population. And I can just go park after park after park. These were lands and places where people didn't get access to. These were soiled and contaminated, now it's being returned. These lands are being healed for people to enjoy. So that was the late 20th century. We're in the 21st century. The question is, what's next? Where do we go from here? I'm not going to touch on all these points. I will do some very quickly. And as we look at parks in the 21st century, we now want to talk about equity. We want to talk about resiliency and sustainability, caring for parks, and I'm going to end on what this conversation is about, planning and placemaking. So let me quickly go through equity to put things in context coming on board. We realized that equity in our city wasn't distributed evenly. And when I use the word equity, I use the word fairness. Are we being fair about how we plan for our parks and public spaces throughout the city? Are we treating all neighborhoods the same? And the answer was no, and we had to change it. So we decided to do a report. It was released with the mayor in October called A Framework for an Equitable Future. There are a lot of initiatives under this one, but I'm going to talk very quickly about the one that's really transforming our city, and that's the Community Parks Initiative. Well, what happened? We wanted to find out of all of our parks how many received less than $250,000 over the past 2 decades. And it turned out, essentially, there were about 215. The city has spent $6 billion. We added 1,100 acres, and then see that walk score? Close to about 75% of all New Yorkers were within a quarter mile. But it wasn't just about proximity, it's about quality. Because a family, a person can go to that park, look at it and say, I'm not going in. I'm not going anywhere near that park. Should they have counted in that walk score that they did not have a space that they can enjoy? So we knew we had to change the paradigm and figure out how it was not just proximity, but also quality as well. And so as I stated, we did this analysis, and it turned out when we looked all over the city, 215 parks throughout our entire city had seen little investment in 2 decades. Families, seniors, young children, generations that did not have access to a quality park, and we knew we had to change that equation. Bottom line is we invested $130 million to transform 35 parks. Nancy Prince, my office, is here. We are now engaging the community to transform these spaces, multi-generational, and I can't wait for you to see these parks. These hard surfaces are being transformed to green oases, whether it's for seniors and young people. Instead of playgrounds, there's now these wonderful creative places that people can now play and enjoy. And it is just, you'll see them by December of 2017, but it is transforming neighborhoods in 35 of our cities, and we're using $130 million to do it, and so we're excited about the future. And so it's going to transform neighborhoods and community districts, and for the first time, give true access, another 220,000 people to that 10-minute walk. So now they can be counted in that 75%. Before, I don't think it was fair to do that. We're also changing the conversation about caring for parks. Yes, we need to maintain our parks, but we need to care for them as well. Now, I have a 17-year-old daughter. She's a few blocks away. And if I say, honey, I want to maintain you, she says, Dad, what are you talking about? I want to care for my daughter. Maintenance is one thing, we need to do it, but caring shows a sign of love for our public spaces that we want to change throughout our entire city. Because I can look in a space and know when it's not cared for. We want to make sure we care for our public spaces. And so we're starting this whole concept about how do we understand the health of our park system, the diagnostics, the intelligence to know that we are caring, truly caring for our parks, neighborhood to neighborhood. And here are some infographics that you're showing around the country about how we're caring and loving for our parks. And we want to shift gears, and I love this because this is McGlorick Park. We love our park. It's a love note to us. People love parks and fall in love in parks, and we need to understand what it means to a city that is dense as this. Because in a city like New York, density and open space go together like peanut butter and jelly. You cannot separate the two. They absolutely need to work together. And so here are some examples of all the community groups that are taking their time, where they want to hang out and love some of our incredible public spaces. And I even love the fact that even our park employees are sharing to the next generation the importance of caring and loving our parks. But now I want to get to the key thing about the conversation tonight, and that's planning and placemaking. Something new to the Parks Department. Am I right, Parkies? They're like, what are you talking about? Placemaking? What does that mean? Well, we first had a conversation about what I meant by placemaking. And it's about the experience. Everyone in this room, you go to restaurants, you visit cities, you go to places and parks because of the experience. That's why you go. So we shouldn't just be designers. We need to be experience builders. We need to understand the experience of the people that use our spaces. Because ultimately, that's where you go and why you return and where you go with your friends. It's because of the experience, and we have to understand that. And then there's the memory. A lot of you, if I ask you to tell me about some of the most cherished memories you've had, it will be with families or certain places, and it's our job to help create memories for present and future generations as we plan for our public spaces. And so while there are other points on the slide, it's shifting gears to how do we build an experience for the people who use our parks. So, can you imagine in the 21st century, people could actually put chairs and tables in a street and enjoy themselves? They're there because of the experience. Young, old. This is right near the High Line on 9th Avenue and 14th Street. And now just by putting umbrellas, you're there, they're there because it's an experience. And it's a very popular location. But we want to make sure we understand how this experience translates to different generations. At any given time, there are 6 generations. Everybody in this room is on this list. If you're not, you're dead. So I know everybody here is on this list. But when we plan for the experience, each one of these generations experience public space a very different way. Each generation has different values, needs, and aspirations, and it drives the demand for public space, for neighborhoods, for communities, and we have to think that way. It's not just one generation, and it goes to culture as well. So when we plan, we want to think about who we're planning for. And here are some of the generations, and in New York City, X, Y, and Z represent close to 63% of our population, 47 and below. And when we plan in our public meetings, very often we have the older generations. You don't just plan for who's in the room. We have to spend the time to reach out to all generations, even though X, Y, and Z don't show up and don't do public meetings. We have to reach out to them and find them because we're planning for parks for them as well as all the generations. So this slide is absolutely important. And if you start looking at the various spaces that you're seeing, I mean, here it is. This is now placemaking. Who knew an abandoned railroad would now be one of the world's most famous parks? Over 5 million visitors come to this space, our railroad. Why? Because of the experience, the views that you get as you go to the High Line. And then now, just let's look at this slide for a second. People are sitting on steps looking at a street. Who does that? You do. Why? They enjoy the experience. This is one of the most popular spots on the High Line that people are there, they're seeing cars go by, but they're enjoying the experience of the space. So, you know, if we had more time, we could talk about what makes this space important to them, but this is one that's quite popular. Also, as you walk along the High Line, what I love about it is that each block, each step is a mystery. You don't know what you're going to uncover. And as you walk up and down, people are constantly taking pictures. And when you go to High Line, you're seeing some of these spaces and views for the very first time. And what I'm very excited about is that we're now taking this concept about parks. Parks don't end at the edges. There's a context, edges, entrances, sidewalks, and crosswalks. Parks don't end at the border, at the curb. They go beyond. They embrace the neighborhood. And now in the Parks Department, we're having a conversation about parks without borders. And parks represents 14% of the city's footprint. But if you add streets and sidewalks, that's 26%, 40% of the city's public realm is both parks, sidewalks, and streets. Now, tell me, the average citizen, do they know when they're walking on park property and then DOT property? They don't know. It's all connected, and we need to plan that way. And so the Parks Without Borders initiative is, believe it or not, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Parks, and the Department of Environmental Protection are now forming a team to plan for the public realm as one group. And it's a refreshing, exciting approach about this new concept that's in One NYC about Parks Without Borders, and I'll give you some examples of what that looks like. This is a fence. I don't know what we're protecting. Looks like a wall, But in many parks, for some reason, I don't know if we're trying to keep kids in or keep people out, but in New York City, this is the design that you often see for many of our parks. Now, here's another example, same park. Now, I think what their concern is that the trees are going to run away at night. So we need to fence them in, but this is an area where the community actually wants to transform this space to a garden. And believe it or not, they do have a way in. There it is. And so, believe it or not, we're now rethinking, when should you have a fence? How high should it be? And how it starts embracing the neighborhood. And you'll see some examples shortly. But this is what we're talking about, Parks Without Borders. We need to be more inclusive to the neighborhood and how we plan for parks. This is Rufus King Park. Why is that fence there? Look at the condition of the sidewalk. We're doing work in this park. Can't we? And look at this poor dog. I want to get into green space. Where is there an opening? I mean, look how long this is. But look, this is also part of the park as well. This is part of the public realm. And as we start to rethink, I mean, right now I can envision having benches and these wonderful areas that can truly you can take down this fence and start embracing this as truly a park that blends to the neighborhood and not this segmented space that is separated. And then this is my favorite. We talk about a walk score. A person has to walk an extra 5 minutes. All you have to do is take the fence down. And guess what? We're taking the fence down. It's coming down. People need to hang out in that space. And then this one is by Crotona Pool. This is an edge of a park that we want to transform, and the design is now underway that opens this up. You can see the pool, and all this fence is going to be taken down, and this now is going to be added to the park. So it's not just the park, which is a pool, but it's also the public realm. Planning together gives people a new public realm they have not had before. Parks Without Borders. Where the concept come from, essentially, this is in Raleigh, North Carolina. We started designing a park with some of the park planners. Park planners just said, okay, we're going to stop at the edge. And said, wait a minute. There's a children's museum here, bus terminal here, and a start market right here. We decided to plan all the edges to embrace the uses next to it so it all blends together. Now there are seating here for people waiting for the restaurant, spray gardens here for the kids to play, and paths to get to the station. This is what we mean by rethinking how we plan. This is not the border. This is the border of when you start to plan and to study. And right now this project is under construction. So here's an example, Greensboro, North Carolina. Do you see any fences? Do you see how they embrace the entire public realm, the benches, into the entire park space? It is a park without a border, embracing the entire neighborhood. But guess what? We're doing it here. This is Father Demo Square in Manhattan, and this is what we want to see more of. Very popular space, seamless sidewalk, low fences. You start to feel the openness of how it's all connected. So as we plan the 21st century, we want more parks without borders. Now, this one's interesting. This also is in North Carolina. It's just turf. That's it. Nothing more. The most popular spot where people go. Why? There's a Starbucks here, a Ben & Jerry's there. The parents surround the space. Kids take off their shoes. And the parents serve them as the fences. When they start running, even if it's not your child, you stop them from running into the street. It's very interactive, and all it is just a piece of turf. We're forgetting the idea of creative play, of kids just using their imagination to enjoy public space. And guess what? We're doing that too. Washington Square Park. Rather than having all that play equipment, we have little mounds where kids can exercise. Here's this little child rolling down the hill. I saw parents rolling down the hill. We're forgetting the fact that there's creative play and future play in different ways that you can interact with space. This is more what we want to plan for the future. And this is a recent example. I was in Australia where they too are exploring with creative space and design for children with disability. And even Central Park. They're always telling me our parks are dangerous. You're going to get hurt. But then I go to Central Park and watch these parents rolling down a boulder. Does that look safe? People know what's safe or not safe. And again, we want to make sure people have a great time as they experience our public spaces. And we want to do things that are more interesting, public art, creative ways you can enjoy public space. In Seattle, there are families now that are getting together and having giant Scrabble board games right there on asphalt. A great use of public space where they can hang out and enjoy themselves. And you see all the different applications that we want to start using placemaking to really enliven some of those parks don't get a lot of attention. And then one of my favorites here in Montreal, parks are open 12 months a year. We want people to come out and enjoy the public spaces. These are just little shimmer lights with LEDs, and now this is a wonderful experience that people can come out and enjoy their public spaces. And then there's the cool in Martinique. Somebody saw a little tree and decided to be creative. I really love this one. But it's starting to really take ownership of the public realm, extending those parks beyond its borders. And so our goal is to create a bright, green, and equitable future for our park system to be innovative. And for that, I will entertain your questions later, but thank you.